Why was it? I mean, why was it emblematic of a disaster? Was because a few weeks earlier they'd had what I considered a fairly successful Republican National Convention, at which the president of the Teamsters, Sean O'Brien, was speaking, the first representative of his union to address Republicans, and it was going for this kind of pro-worker conservatism thing. And Sean O'Brien like looked foolish. I hate to say, or not. It wasn't Sean's fault. He was made to look. He was made to be put in this unenviable position. And of course, he rightly then O'Brien put out a statement saying what Donald Trump and Elon Musk were talking about there is economic terrorism. But again,
Mm-hmm.
it's that stuff, like really, really extreme tech libertarian overlord stuff, plays well to like this very ultimately fairly small online right subset, not to the wider country. And I thought that having defeated Ron DeSantis on those terms, they wouldn't succumb to the same temptation to pitch themselves to the online right.
Well, also, what do you make of the choice of JD Vance for the ticket and where he fits into these online right subcultures?
Well, I see. I'm been pretty supportive of JD, and so because I think he represents, alongside a few other lawmakers, mainly in this Republican lawmakers in the Senate, this attempt to like seriously shift the Republican Party away from its free market orthodoxies. If you think about his record as a senator, which by the way I don't hear about from the campaign itself, these are things I would have touted, but all the things that JD has achieved are, you know, by achieved or set out to achieve as a senator are done, first of all, in a bipartisan way, whether it's partnering with Senator Liz Warren to claw back executive compensation from banks that had to be bailed out by the taxpayer, or partnering with Senator Warnock on reducing insulin prices, to his own fellow Ohioan Senator Sherrod Brown, the Democrat senator from Ohio. They partnered up on a railroad reform bill, and in each of these cases, the opposition to these bills or reforms comes not from the Democrats; it comes from the kind of Chamber of Commerce faction of the Republican Party. So, you know, so of course I welcome the choice of JD Vance, but what my hope has been is that JD will elevate populism into this kind of a serious agenda, you know, this policy, and they are doing some of that, but some too often it's been drowned out by, you know, the kind of stuff like the Haitians eating cats and so forth, which
Yeah, which
uh,
really originated with him, and which he doubled and tripled down on, and then gave that interview to Dana Bash where he said, well, if I have to create stories to get people to pay attention, that's what I'm going to do.
Now, to
Um,
be fair, though, just in the spirit, like, when he
yeah,
said create stories, he did that was, I think, misinterpreted as I'm going to create false stories. It
but he
just
did
means
create
as
a
a
false story,
politician,
Sora.
but he
I
meant
know his
I'm going to
excuse
like
is,
push this. Yeah,
I'm going to push this to get attention to something that's important. The other lie there is that the mainstream press hadn't covered what was going on in Springfield, Ohio. The New York Times and PBS had already done significant stories about Springfield, Ohio. It's just because it didn't contain these salacious and outrageous lies. They're
yeah,
received and they're taken. Okay, there's some pluses and minuses, and this town's struggling with it. Okay. The nuanced
yeah.
story wasn't a, tabloid headline that they could use.
No,
So,
I
I mean,
appreciated that time story. It was
yeah,
something. It was framed as like, immigrants had helped revive this Ohio town, and then a car accident happened or something like that. Which I mean, okay, that's a certain
but
framing.
I
But
want
then
to, I want to
in the
push you
body of
though.
the piece,
Hmm.
the grievances of the local community in terms of the pressure that this was putting on local services like schools and healthcare and so on was
Yeah,
aired out in the New
yeah,
York Times, and that's something I've been saying on Twitter to, um, again, the online right types who are like, well, if they hadn't gone for the cats thing, no one would be talking about the wages of immigration in a
right.
place like uh, uh, Springfield, Ohio. I was like, no, actually, like, to be fair, the mainstream was talking about it.
So
Um,
I want to push you a little bit because there's something here. There's a tension here with regard to JD Vance that I think is interesting to tease out. Because on the one hand, I understand, given your ideological positioning, if you look at the United States Senate, JD Vance, you look at the voting record and the legislation he's pushed, and the small areas I would say where he's broken with Republican orthodoxy. Okay, I understand why you would look at that and say, this is, of all the Republicans you could pick, this would be one of my favorite candidates. So then what does it say then that when he gets out on the campaign trail, first of all, I mean, he's the one who leads the Haitian pets thing. And it's not like he has really leaned into the type of like, hey, let's do child tax credit. That hasn't been a central part of his pitch. It has been more to lean into this sort of like subversive, online, conspiratorial culture. And I wonder what you make of that, because I don't think JD, I mean, he's an Ivy League educated person. I know he's a very intelligent guy. I think he knows what he's doing and doesn't feel like if he's just out there pushing for like paid family leave, then he just sounds like a lib. Or even, some of the interviews that have been unearthed where he's talking about childless cat ladies and we got to punish the childless and those sorts of things. It feels like he wasn't really chosen because of his new right economic ideology so much as the way that he plays effectively in the culture war and the way that he appeals to that Tucker Carlson crowd.
I think that's partly, again, there are things in the Trump platform which I think are still legitimately populist and again, I think bringing immigration under control is a legitimate grievance and a legitimate populist issue. I also think the tariffs agenda, coupled with industrial policy, and that's an important part of it, which we are not seeing yet from Team Trump, but the universal tariff coupled with industrial policy is a valuable step. I think one of the problems, I wrote another piece for the New Statesman where the headline was Donald Trump's identity crisis, that you're putting your finger on, is that in 2016, and Kyle said this too, but in 2016, it was easier to be populist because the bipartisan establishment was so committed to neoliberal globalization, just like open up, it doesn't matter what we manufacture, we can just have a services economy, we can, who cares if all manufacturing goes away, et cetera, et cetera. That was the elite consensus. And then Trump came along and he put his finger on the ravages of that model of globalization. And he did change the conversation so that by 2024, skepticism about the older model of globalization and insistence on reshoring industry and domestic manufacturing revival, et cetera, has become like the center-left establishment has granted that.
Yeah.
The Bidenism was basically is in some ways Trumpism under a different name. And in some ways, Trumpism better, more effectively executed. If you think about like a legislative agenda, like the IRA and the CHIPS Act. Yeah. So that leaves so where do they go from here if the right populace? Now I would do X, Y, Z, but I would say that they've not reached a good answer to that. And the second factor, I think, is just the enormous influence of a coterie of mainly Silicon Valley type and Wall Street type billionaires. I do think that in 2016, Trump could just really rely on his own for the most part. And 8 years later, I think, he's facing an enormous legal bill, whatever the merits of those various cases, it differs. And he's decided he wants to move as part of a pack as opposed to like Trump against the world. And the pack that he's chosen are like guys like Jeff Yass, who is a minority shareholder in TikTok, so that when Congress brings up this measure, which is perfectly Trumpian, right? It's about insisting that this firm divest its Chinese ownership. It goes after China and Silicon Valley. You couldn't ask for a more Trumpian issue. Trump flip-flops and says, no, I'm opposed to this bill. Of course, it didn't escape anyone's notice that Jeff Yass is a minority shareholder in TikTok. So that's an ongoing dynamic of the Republican Party, which I wouldn't want to put all the blame on JD, because I just think like the party is much more beholden to its oligarchic wing in some ways than the Democrats are. We can get to why, but I think it's because big capital has come to see the Democratic Party as the reliable party of state or the reliable party of government. And so they have to kiss the Democratic Party's ring, and they have to compete for its favor. Whereas the Republican Party is this kind of rump party of the small and regional capital, and then they have a few oligarchs who support the party, and those are treated worshipfully, Elon, etc. And so, and I think that fact is inimical to a populist agenda. For example, even on immigration, a lot of these Silicon Valley kind of right-wing billionaires want more immigration. And you had Trump going and saying, if any foreign students graduates with just at least an associate's degree, a 2-year degree, we're going to staple a green card to their uh, uh,
Diploma. Yeah, this was
sorry,
this was
my
no
mind.
that was like a Hillary Clinton's position in
Well,
2016.
but I think what you
Right.
guys are proving here is that Trump, the whole time, is about Trump, right? So, like, this time, I feel like he's kind of tired after running twice and being president, and he went into, in front of a group of multimillionaires and billionaires at Mar-a-Lago, and he told them straight up, like, the clearest quid pro quo of all time, like, you guys got to give me $30 million. You give me $30 million, I get you more tax cuts, right? So to your point about the flip-flopping on TikTok, I look at that and I think, what's the connecting tissue between this Trump and the Trump previously is the whole time it's all about what do I think is good for me and getting in power. And that brings us to the J.D. Vance pick because apparently, according to the reporting, J.D. Vance was picked because Tucker and Trump's sons and Elon wanted him to pick J.D. Vance, and they thought this is like an heir apparent to ideological Trumpism. But I think for Trump himself, it came more down to JD was willing to be a sycophant and willing to say, hey, I wouldn't have done what Pence did with certifying the election. And so I think at the end of the day, honestly, I think the most accurate way to view Trump is I think the hardcore resistance liberals from the beginning were correct that it's like he doesn't really care about anything. He's about himself and getting himself more power and surrounding himself with yes men. I've grown to think that that's like the best way to evaluate his decisions because it seems like an ironclad law of nature every time he makes a decision that, oh, this is just about you. It's not some ideological project.
Yeah, I hate to pretend like other politicians don't have the same tendency or like that they're all just there just being idealistically committed. But I think it's not inaccurate to say that that this problem is especially so with Donald Trump. And for a time, his ambition, and all politicians are ambitious, but for a time his ambition aligned with a certain set of grievances that were not being addressed by the mainstream center left or center right. I mean, he barreled his way also past like 15, 16 conventional Republicans in 2016 by defying Republican orthodoxies, right? Calling the Iraq war a disaster, hinting at his support for a public option in healthcare, upholding entitlements, defending entitlements against Paul Ryan type quote unquote reformers and entitlement cutters. He's doing all this stuff, and it feeds his ambition. It's just that 8 years later, the landscape is more complex, and feeding his ambition in part means like buddying it up with a very decidedly non-populist figure like Elon Musk, who's out to destroy the National Labor Relations Board. I mean, he's calling the National Labor Relations Board, the foundation of the New Deal, to be unconstitutional. Now, hilariously enough, I saw yesterday that the Autobahn Society has also joined this ridiculous theory.
Yeah, saw
the
that too.
Relations Board
I think Starbucks is involved also, aren't they? Yeah,
and Trader Joe's. So it's fun, and this is where we should be kind of hard nosed about this. It's just an interesting observation that when it comes to their material interests, like the left wing and right wings of capital can perfectly set that aside and work. So like,
no doubt about it.
Otherwise, spurned by many of his fellow billionaires, when it comes to this battle, they're behind him.
Yeah, let's be comrades in arms.
All right, guys, this is just a little piece of a much longer conversation with Sohrab Ahmari talking about the difference between Trump 2016 and 2024 and what it's like to actually be a populist on the right and see that the right has gone insane and MAGA has gone insane. He has a lot of insight, a lot of interesting stuff to say. If you want to check it out, sign up below on Substack.
Ask yourself, do you really want this again? Or this? Or this? But what if we could move past all of this and have a president like this? Someone who believes in opportunity for all, who believes in freedom for all, who believes in the promise of America for all of us. We are not going back to this. It's time for this.
Welcome to the very best part of my broadcast week. You know, no one until our guest ever in the White House briefing room blew me a kiss. Now, it wasn't to me, not me personally.
How do you
it was
know
to
that?
the room.
Perhaps it was to you personally.
That is the voice of our guest this week, Anthony Scaramucci, who for 11 remarkable days was communications director for President Trump in the Trump White House. Anthony, great to see you. Thanks for joining us.
It's great to be here. I think the last time I saw you in person was on that very last day that I got fired. Okay, that was a big day for me, the fire.
It was a big day. We will always share that, Anthony.
Yeah,
we will
exactly.
always share that. Tell me where you think this race is, who's the favorite, and what dynamics are you watching in the next 50 or so days?
Well, listen, I'm a markets person, as you know. I'm an asset manager. So the poly market favors Trump. I think he's 53-46. The predictive market has it closer. So there's really no clear winner. The polling has it almost at a dead heat. I do think you have to say objectively that Trump is favored because he has been underpolled consistently since 2016. Now the pollsters say that they've adjusted for that. Okay, and I'll take them at their word that they have adjusted for it, and so therefore it's too close to call at this point. But if I were advising both campaigns, I would say that Harris is the underdog here.
And let me ask you a basic question. When Joe Biden was running, he was clearly the incumbent. Joe Biden is no longer running. Is now Trump a sort of pseudo incumbent?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. I think he's viewed by a very large portion of the electorate as almost like the incumbent. It's interesting. She's got a lot of legislative success, having worked in the Biden-Harris administration. Hopefully she can advocate on that stuff. But he's got the incumbency. He's the president. He's the former president. So it's an interesting mix. It's almost like two incumbents are running at the same time, and I'm just wondering if that cancels each other out. It's almost like one of those algebra equations that you and I remember from middle school. I don't know if that's going to be a big deal here. This will be policy driven. This will be direction driven. Some people talk about vibes, where Harris is a little bit more joyful, a little bit more energetic. Trump is a little bit more divisive. He says a lot of denigrating things about the country. It's very anti-Ronald Reagan-esque, if you will. He's constantly criticizing the country and calling our political leaders incompetent, which also spreads out into the general incompetence of the country. Yet, if you look at us comparatively, we have the largest, most successful economy in the world, most successful economy since COVID, lots of inspiring data for the U.S. She's got to explain that to the American people. I know the American people are up against it with inflation, but just 2 seconds on that, because I think this is very important. We personalize onto our political leaders economic cycles. You were going to get that inflation measure. You had an induction of monetary policy, monetary surplus into the economy, and fiscal stimulus into the economy simultaneously. Had Trump won that election, it would be Donald Trump's inflation. We have a tendency to personalize on candidates or political leaders what happens cyclically or situationally. And I think Vice President Harris has to explain that. The numbers are coming down. Economy's getting better. Her message has to be stay the course with our strategy and our policy. By the way, Goldman Sachs just came out with their research report saying that the Harris economic policies would be better for economic growth, better for job expansion, and also better for the deficit. So these are things she would have to say. I'm not exactly sure the Trump argument on these tariffs. He's out over the weekend telling people that tariffs are not paid by them; they're paid by the country. It's not true. Tariffs are paid by the taxpayers. And also tariffs are a regressive tax. They hurt poor people way more than they hurt rich people. And so there's lots of disinformation about that out there. I'm not exactly sure how he gets around that if she holds him accountable.
And just another quick observation, looking at the numbers globally, all of our free market democratic countries who are not only allies, but also economic rivals to us, they all got inflation. What they didn't get was wage growth, job growth, and economic growth like we did.
Yeah, no question. So we benefited from the flexibility in our system. One thing people should not forget about our system, the U.S. government is very flat and very decentralized. There's no central authority in the government. And so that gives a wide space for business leaders and wide space for lots of flexibility. The type of stuff that Donald Trump's talking about and the type of stuff that's in the Heritage Foundation Project 2025 is a lot more centralization. And what we know from the rest of the world, central authority usually leads to a very big imbalance in terms of economic growth and economic benefit. The very small group of people at the top benefit, everyone else gets destroyed. And so she's got to explain that to people. I think she can do it.
Anthony, for my audience, explain your arc of life with Trump. What attracted you to him? What held you there for a while?
Yeah.
What caused the break?
Well, first of all, everybody's on an arc with Donald Trump. And so if anybody says to you that they're friends with Donald Trump, they don't really understand the relationship. You're never friends with Donald Trump. They're either name dropping inappropriately or they don't understand Mr. Trump and what he represents. And so everybody's on an arc. They typically start out disliking him. That would include Ted Cruz, myself, Kellyanne Conway, Mike Pompeo. There's a legion of people that have very derogatory things to say about Mr. Trump when he was a candidate. Lindsey Graham. Okay. And then you go from that position to a favorable position where you're trying to like him and you're trying to get along with him because he's the political leader, and therefore you see yourself as a team player and you want to be a part of his team to see if you can make things work with him. And then you have your break and you go to where I am right now is, well, wait a minute, you're really not on a team. He's a team of one. And a lot of the things that he's saying are quite anti-American and they're derogatory about our system. And he's overly currying favor with dictators. He wants to break up our alliances and he wants to really disrupt the way the economy works in the society. And so then you have to be on Team America and not Team Trump. And then you have to do something that's very hard psychologically. You have to break with President Trump and break with the party that I've been affiliated with for the last, 42 years, which is the Republican Party. I'm a 60-year-old guy. I registered to vote in 1982. So for 42 years, I've been with the Republican Party. I had to break with them in 2020 and explain, hey, he's systemically dangerous to the society. I'm a patriot first and a partisan second. So that's the arc. Okay, now the thing about Trump is it's like a carousel. People board the carousel. And so J.D. Vance hated Donald Trump. You've got recordings of that. He's now on the carousel. I would say he's 6 months to 2 years behind me. He'll get burnt to a crisp and he'll be denouncing Donald Trump sometime in 2026. Mike Pence. Mike Pence basically has said under no circumstances would he endorse Donald Trump. Started out negative, went to positive. Now he's in the negative category. And so this happens with everybody. And so I'm ahead of these guys. I laugh at some of these billionaires in Silicon Valley that are endorsing Trump. They're giving a cursory analysis of where we all were in 2016. You now have 8 years of data of what Mr. Trump is really like, what his plans are, how destructive he is. You have film of the January 6, 2021 insurrection. You have commentary from the vice president, who was on the ballot with him twice. And you have all of this stuff here, but there is the superficial analysis from 2016, and you've got some of these Silicon Valley billionaires supporting him. They will be where I am eventually. It's just a matter of time because that's the nature of the destruction that Donald Trump represents.
The voice of Anthony Scaramucci. More of our conversation with Anthony when we come back for segment 2 of The Takeout.
He wanted to burn the place down on January 6th. He wants to liquidate branches of the government. He doesn't like the Constitution.
Welcome back to The Takeout. Anthony Scaramucci is our special guest. Anthony, you talked about this a little bit. I want to dig a bit deeper because you have insights to this that I think not every or very few of my guests do. You talked about the Silicon Valley billionaires. There are also some Wall Streeters who are with Trump, again, despite, as you said, 8 years of data. What is that about at its core? Is it simply transactional? It's just a bet on a political figure they think will win and they want to be there early and remembered, or something else?
Well, I think some of it is transactional. We have a tendency on Wall Street to be transactional. Some of it is the culture war. You have to accept that there's things going on the hard left that a lot of people don't like. You know, the notion that they would be taxing unrealized gains in our system, which I think is probably the stupidest idea that I've ever heard. As an example, there are people on Wall Street that would cling to that and say, okay, well, I can't be with Vice President Harris because she and Joe Biden are suggesting that. So there are things about the hard left that moderate Wall Streeters don't like, and so they'll provide justification for being with Trump along those lines. But what I tell those people, what they're missing, that's a very superficial analysis. What they're missing is the high level of destruction. He wants to burn the place down. He wanted to burn the place down on January 6th. He wants to liquidate branches of the government. He doesn't like the Constitution. He's got people with him that are talking about a post-constitutional America. Those are people that have worked on the Heritage Foundation Project 2025. Trump denounced that project because it doesn't poll well. Yet one of his former OMB directors that's working alongside of him said, hey, he was just kidding about that. They caught him on tape in a hotel room as he was trying to recruit somebody. Trump's all in on Project 2025. And so this is anti-American stuff. This is non-inclusive. This is forcing your lifestyle on other people. Remember, Trump is calling for, from the podium, a 15 million person deportation from America. So that implies SWAT teams, armored vehicles. Handmaid's Tale season 1 will get all 9 episodes from Donald Trump. And then what do you do with these people when you pull them out of their houses, Major? You've got to put them in camps. They've admitted that. They got to concentrate them in camps. So this is a holish nightmare for people. I don't think the Wall Streeters are as focused on the details of the policy, and I think that's very dangerous.
You must have conversations with your friends on Wall Street, or are aware of people who do have conversations of the kind you just articulated. Is there any answer back?
The answer back is the pushback on wokeism. The answer back is the pushback on the cultural dilemma that we're facing with the left, the hard left, the Palestinian protests, and the space that's being offered to these protests by the Palestinians. Most of the people that I know on Wall Street are Zionists. They're pro-Israel. They don't like the anti-Semitism that's out there. They think that there's been space provided for anti-Semitism from the hard left, not from Vice President Harris, and certainly not from President Biden, who I think have done more for Israel than most administrations. You've got 2 aircraft carriers off the shore of Israel right now, helping to defend Israel. You've got arms deals, arms supply going into the country to protect the state of Israel. But the hard left has taken a different position on this stuff. And I think it damages her story, her narrative with some of these Wall Street people.
You mentioned that Wall Street is transactional by its very nature. How transactional is former President Trump?
Well, I think he's probably the most transactional person that I've met in my career. He'll go with the wind, and he'll tell you one thing, he'll back the Trump over you the next day. He doesn't care. If he has to run you over to pursue his dreams, there's no friendships in Trump world. Trump Major Garrett could play golf with you for 40 years. You drop dead of a heart attack at the halfway house at the ninth hole. He'll turn and say, "Who the hell was Major Garrett? Give me another guy out here to play golf with me." He doesn't care. Okay. And people need to know that about him. There's a level of ruthlessness that you perhaps need to be president, but I don't think it comes with the cruelty that's associated with Donald Trump and associated now with the acolytes around him. Remember, Donald Trump is, if he should rise to power again, he's not coming with garden variety Republicans. He's not coming with middle of the road, moderate Republican appointees. He's coming with hard right people that have now adhesed themselves to Donald Trump and see him as a medium, see him as a messenger to carry their policies into the White House. I think it'd be incredibly dangerous. This is something that's very short-sighted about the Wall Streeters. They may get their tax cut, they may get some deregulation, but up against that, they're going to get very heavy, very strict tariffs. Up against that, they're going to get a misalignment of goals with our allies. They could get a potential revocation of NATO. And I'll just remind people that the American military footprint is one of the big reasons why capital continues to flow into the United States. The predictability of our laws, the fact that the dollar is still the reserve currency of the world, and the fact that we're able to project peace through our military, by and large peace throughout the world, very important for business. And Mr. Trump is calling about disrupting all three of those things, and he is touting isolationism from the bully pulpit, and it's never worked for the United States, isolationism. So I think it'd be extremely dangerous to bring him back to office.
What do you make of Trump's playing footsie with crypto?
Very transactional. Mr. Trump is told that he could raise 50, 60, $100 million from crypto enthusiasts and crypto billionaires. He was very negative on crypto when he was in the White House. Now, all of a sudden, he's positive on crypto. Now, he should be, in my opinion, because as you probably know, I'm in that industry and I'm very bullish long term on Bitcoin. I think this has been a mistake by the hard left. Elizabeth Warren and Gary Gensler have actually hurt, in my opinion, the Harris campaign. Should she lose and they do an eventual autopsy, will be this misalignment on the future of financial innovation. So Trump is there, but he's there in that loosey-goose transactional way. He said something at the Bitcoin conference. I heard his whole speech this past summer, and he said, "Okay, you guys have fun with this." Okay, and it was a very flippant remark, like, "I don't know what it is. I don't care what it is, but it's giving me money, so I'm going to be supportive." Now, my crypto friends are mad at me because I'm obviously endorsed Vice President Harris. But I point out to them, you don't want to be attached to Mr. Trump, because when you're attached to Mr. Trump, it comes with all of that unseemly baggage that he represents, including his 34 felony counts. And the crypto industry needs to continue to clean up its act and continue to reform and have great operators in the industry. And I don't think Mr. Trump fairly represents that. Having said that, I want Gary Gensler fired. I stand with Mark Cuban, a fellow Harris supporter, that thinks Gary Gensler has been the worst chairman of the SEC in the history of the commission.
Minute 30, the Melania factor.
Yeah.
What is it?
Well, I think it's a factor for Mr. Trump that his family is not with him. I think you have to remember that this guy, whether you like him or not, it could be a dysfunctional relationship, but he had his family with him in the real estate business. He had his family with him in The Apprentice. He had members of his family with him in the White House first term, and he also had those family members campaigning with him. He has little of that now. I mean, one big tell is Corey Lewandowski re-arriving in Trump's orbit because he didn't get along well with Jared Kushner or Ivanka Trump. That tells me that those two are no longer part of this campaign.
They have completely pieced out.
Yeah, anywhere near it. So I think that has an impact on Trump. I think Trump doesn't like that, and I think it's hurting him in different ways because there's no temperance to his speeches. There's no modifier in there. There's nobody saying, "Hey, whoa, you may not want to say you're going to jail the donors of Vice President Harris." Oh, whoa, you may not want to say that you're going to pardon all of the January 6th insurrectionists that are in jail right now. You may be too far off the road. You may not want to say that Vice President Harris just turned black. She wasn't black prior to this campaign, but she's turned black. And again, I apologize. I'm even saying that on your podcast because it's so inappropriate and it's so outlandish. But this is the stuff that the family offered sort of a bumper or a modifier, a guardrail. It's no longer there. And so he's reeling all over the road.
The voice of Anthony Scaramucci coming back for his for continuing our conversation in segment 3 of the Takeout. I promise I'll have my voice back when we return.
Donald Trump is, let's take it back to 1947, old white America. Let me double and triple down on my base with J.D. Vance.
Welcome back to the Takeout. Our guest, Anthony Scaramucci. Anthony, when I was in Milwaukee at the Republican convention and talking to all the Republicans who were measuring the drapes of the White House, only talking about the magnitude of Trump's coming victory, I would have said to you, if you'd asked me, I see a narrow path for Biden to win narrowly. I see a narrow path for Trump to win narrowly, and I see a big path for Trump to win big. If you'd ask me that question now, looking at surge in registration since Harris became the nominee in 2021, July 21st, rather. This demographic shift that you mentioned, the excitement, the sense of fundraising, I would say I see a narrow path for Trump to win narrowly. I see a narrow path for Harris to win narrowly, but I now see a path for Harris to win big. Do you see any path for Harris to win big?
So it's interesting. If you take the 2022 midterm elections, one thing the pollsters did in that midterm election is they didn't properly represent the Democratic surge that came in the last 2 weeks of the election. And that was based on reproductive freedom. And so Joe Biden was supposed to get destroyed in the midterm elections, and it turned out that he did better than Barack Obama, George Bush, et cetera. You know, actually, George Bush won that election because of the war, but let's say Ronald Reagan. Okay, and so Biden did better because of reproductive freedom. I think you've got a Obama coalition brewing for Vice President Harris. I think she's got outreach that's second to none. If you look at voter registration in the states that she needs to win, the surge has really been in the African American community. It's been with women. And when they're polled, the likely voters, she's +6 with the likely voters nationally, and that's enough to win the general election. So if she continues to organize in this way, she could win big. And let me give you one other thing to consider, because I've been around this a long time, as you have. This is a turnout election. A lot of people have already made the decision who they're going to vote for, but it's now, am I going to get that person to the polling? And in certain states, let's just use Pennsylvania as an example, she's got 24 outposts, he's got 12. And again, I'm talking about their outposts. I'm not talking about local Republican outposts or local Democrat. I'm talking about Harris campaign staked outposts, Trump campaign staked outposts. Let's not exaggerate the numbers. It's 24 to 12. Okay, and so she's out manning him. Or out womaning him. She has more personnel. She's got more money to spend. And in a get out the vote election, she's favored to win that. And by the way, you know this, but it's worth repeating. Registrations for Republicans are on the decline. Registrations for Democrats are static to up a little. And of course, the largest number of voters now are independents. She has a path to win a lot of those independents because of what her message is, both on economic policy, where she stands with our allies, and where she stands with the general ideas around unifying the country and a forward vision for the country as opposed to something that's regressive that Donald Trump represents. Donald Trump is, let's take it back to 1947, old white America. And let me double and triple down on my base with J.D. Vance. Her message is very, very different, and we'll have to see where the people go. But Major, you remember this. In 2012, when Romney lost, and I worked for Governor Romney, when he lost to Barack Obama, we got together and we put a memo together, and we said the Republican Party needs to look more like the beautiful, colorful mosaic of the American people.
Yep.
We didn't go with that. What we ended up having is a takeover of the Republican Party. A man by the name of Donald Trump came in with Trumpism. He was a third party candidate, if you really want to look at it analytically, but he took over in an M&A transaction, one of the two parties, and he liquidated that traditional Republican Party and he replaced it with Trumpism. And that's what we have now. And the question is that what the United States wants to move forward with? Trumpism. And I don't think there's enough of those people. I predict that she wins this election, but it is close. And it is telling you something about our country, that there's a very large group of people in the country that feel disaffected. And if you like politics, love the country, we have to heal that. We have to bring those people back into our social contract and make them feel aspirational about America like our parents and our grandparents once did.
You know, Anthony, I've attended more than 100 Trump rallies. And there are times when I try to explain to my friends and family the Trump phenomenon. I use one phrase, and I hope you will let me know if you think it has any validity. Said so. For a long time in America, people who liked to watch professional wrestling did not involve themselves in politics. Then Trump came along, and they saw something that looked to them very much like professional wrestling. And the people who didn't involve themselves in politics but loved professional wrestling suddenly got involved. They came off the sidelines or out of the woodwork, and they're part of the Trump coalition. And his rallies look very much like an introduction to a professional wrestling event. They are loud. The walkout is extensive for Trump. He comes out as a conqueror, and that projection of masculinity, strength, and vibrancy takes over the room. And it conveys all sorts of subliminal messages. What do you think of that?
Listen, I agree with it. I think it's a spot on analysis, but I would just want to add a few things. Those people, because I have been to many rallies, did 71 campaign stops with him in 2016, even went to some Bernie Sanders rallies because there were populist elements of what was going on there that was identical to Donald Trump. But I would add just a few sentences to your analysis. I would say when you ask these people that are at this pro wrestling like event, how do they feel about their standing in the world? A lot of these people felt that their parents and grandparents were blue collar aspirational, but they themselves now feel blue collar desperational. And so they're there because they see Trump as an orange wrecking ball. If the system is not working for me, I would like the orange wrecking ball to crash into the system and bring down the system so that we can create a new system. I would make a different argument to those people. I would say, no, the system needs to be tweaked and your voices need to be heard. And oh, by the way, the only politician in the last 16 years that heard them correctly was Joe Biden and his Vice President Harris. They came up with the CHIPS Act. They came up with the onshoring of manufacturing, the $250 billion legislation that they passed in the first year of their presidency. They came up with the Inflation Reduction Act, which benefited you in terms of bridges, roads, and tunnels, which we can point to that as a way to reduce costs of moving goods and services around the country. And we can point to that as a way that wages, something you said earlier in the podcast, wages have risen during the Biden administration. Yeah, we got the inflation, but every industrial nation got that. And I think that the weird thing about it is that they're delivering. The Democrats are delivering, but their messaging on what they're delivering hasn't been there. And that's because, if we're just being honest, and I say this with great respect because I honor him, I think he's a good man, Joe Biden is not the Joe Biden that he once was at age 60. And we're all going the same way, Major. So I say this with great levels of humility. When you're at 81, 81 is different to different people. You know, Trump is 78, but he presents a lot younger than 78, whether we want to admit to that or not. He's having some missteps verbally now, but he does present younger than 78. And so what's before us are a tale of two visions for America. I think she's got the aspirational vision right. His is more destructive. And the question is, how emotional will the electorate be? Will they be tied to him no matter what? Certainly there's a group of those people, to Trump's own words, I can shoot people on Fifth Avenue, they'll still be with me. But is there some people in the middle say, you know, I really don't want to go that far with the radicalism. I don't want SWAT teams deporting people in my neighborhood. I don't want to give up reproductive freedoms for the women in my family. These sorts of things, I think, are going to put her over the top, but she has to execute. And I will say this, because I've been a student of this. I've been on the contrary side of things as it relates to the media. I think she was right not to do any interviews prior to the convention. I think she's been right to be taking a back seat. The media doesn't like it, and a lot of people on the right are criticizing her. But imagine getting thrusted into the spotlight 50 days ago, where you were flipping pancakes and making bacon for your nieces. You're told by the president that he's out,
Right.
you're in. You now have to marshal all of the delegates. You have to make sure you don't gaffe, so you don't have some kind of like Pyrrhic disaster on your hands. You get through that process, and now you've got to prepare yourself for the debate. I believe that the campaign starts on the 11th for Vice President Harris. I think you'll see a media blitz from her, and I think you'll see a narrative, a compelling narrative of why she should be president versus Donald Trump.
The voice of Anthony Scaramucci. Stay tuned for segment 4 of The Takeout, coming your way in just one moment.
What he's representing is too divisive, and it's too long-term harmful.
Welcome back to The Takeout. Anthony Scaramucci is our guest. Anthony, you made a reference to this right before we left for segment 3. How do you actually think Trump looks and sounds right now?
There's something off. There's something I tweeted about this last week. He's changed. There's something different about him. Anybody that's been close to him over the last 10 years knows there's something off. The intonation, his cadences, he's overly repetitive of certain stories. He gets lots of facts wrong. He's missing a beat. And it could be old age, but it could also be the trauma of the near assassination attempt on his life. I mean, thank God he didn't get hurt. I mean, he did get hurt, but thank God he didn't get mortally hurt in that assassination attempt, which was a disgusting act of political violence, which nobody can condone. But I do think that I think that Vance decision was made in the 72 or 96 hours after that attempt on his life. And so it wasn't a great decision for him. I think he knows that. Vance's negatives, vice presidential nominee J.D. Vance's negatives, his net negatives are overwhelming. He literally puts his foot in his mouth almost every time he speaks. It's quite parochial stuff coming out of his mouth, not helping President Trump. It's caused President Trump to shoot in a machine gun-like way about abortion. One day he's for it, one day he's against it. He's going to vote for the proposition in Florida, then he's going to vote against it. He doesn't know where he is, and some of it's coming from his flank. Vance has not done a good job of advocating for him, and so yeah, there's something wrong there. It could be his age. Remember, he's 78, but he also was shot at. And that can have an effect on somebody major. I mean, we have to, we sometimes look at these things like video games, but these are human beings with real lives.
Yeah, he was a 78-year-old man tackled on stage by 5 or 6 members of the Secret Service. That's a traumatic event. It just flat out is. Straight up.
It flat out is, but also, you're hearing of gunshots, and one of those bullets is whizzing by you, hitting your ear. It's got to be a big deal to somebody, and I think it's impacted him. I think it's also impacted the extremists in his speech giving. He's really trying to get attention now. He doesn't like the attention matrix post Joe Biden leaving the race.
He can't stand that Harris draws big crowds.
Yeah, she's drawing big crowds. There's lots of enthusiasm about her campaign. Voter registrations are up for her. She's raised $540 million in the last 5 weeks. All of this stuff unnerves him. And so what he will do is he'll increase the amplitude of his speaking, and he'll increase the emotional bandwidth of it. He'll start saying more and more ridiculous things so that he can get air cover. I'm better looking than her. I mean, like that. I'm probably not allowed to curse in your podcast, but
that's not all right. Go right ahead.
But stuff like that is like, okay, the guy's unhinged. Remember, he's in this for 3 reasons. He wants to avoid jail. He loves money, and so he knows he can figure out ways to make money. off the presidency. And then the third reason, and perhaps the most important reason, is attention. He likes the attention. He's not here to lead the country. He's not here to serve the American people. This is not a public service job for him as much as it's one of self-aggrandizement. And so you got to weigh that when you're going into the voting booth. Now, a lot of Trump people are closed-minded to that. They see him as the great white hope. They see him as their savior of their culture. But if you really look at his life and you look at the way he's acted, he's anything but that. And I'm going to submit a rhetorical question to you and your viewers and listeners. If there were 40 of us that worked at a pharmaceutical company and we all had good resumes and we were well thought of people, and we worked at a pharmaceutical company, said, hey, you know, we were in the factory and we saw that pill being made and that pill is going to poison your child. Are you giving that pill to your child? Let's say we worked at an automotive company and said, look, we were in the assembly line. You're going to get that car on the highway. It's going to explode on the highway. Are you getting in the car? And yet here in American politics, you have 40 people, including his former vice president. Yes, we got Liz and Dick Cheney and others, but I'm talking about people that were inside the gearbox, close range to Trump, inside his radius, in the situation room with him, are telling you he's going to cause a lot of damage to the country. He's going to be out for himself. He's a dictator wannabe, to quote General Milley. This is some really bad stuff. And I'm just surprised that more people are not looking at it the way they would if it was an automotive company or a pharmaceutical company.
What do you think that's about, Anthony? That resilience of that support?
I think it has to do with the culture. I think it has to, we become a tribally conflicted country. We have evidence that that's been fueled by our adversaries. We know there are server farms in Moscow that are